In the early 17th century, there was little reason to believe that Britain, an island on the edge of Europe, would one day rule a quarter of the earth. It possessed no vast armies like Spain, no ancient bureaucracy like China, no population advantage over France. Britain was geographically small, resource-limited, and politically unstable. In the 1500s, it was a secondary power, overshadowed by the great empires of its age: Spain, Portugal, the Ottoman Empire, and Ming China. Spain dominated the Atlantic with silver from the Americas. Portugal controlled sea routes to Africa and Asia. France was richer, larger, and more populous. Britain, by contrast, entered the imperial race late, and at a disadvantage. Its rise was not inevitable, it was engineered. The turning point came in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, as England, soon to become Great Britain, began to solve a strategic problem: how to project power without matching continental armies. The answer lay not on land, but at sea. Britain's geography, long considered a weakness, became an advantage. Surrounded by water, it invested heavily in shipbuilding, navigation, and naval warfare. By the time of the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, England had learned a crucial lesson: survival depended on controlling sea lanes, not territory. This insight would shape everything that followed. By 1707, the Act of Union formally united England and Scotland into Great Britain, pooling financial systems, manpower, and ambition. The timing was critical. Europe was entering an age of global competition, and Britain was ready to think globally. Britain did not rule 25% of the world through conquest alone, it ruled through systems. At the center of this system was the Royal Navy. By the 18th century, Britain possessed the most advanced and disciplined navy on earth. It did not seek to occupy every territory militarily. Instead, it controlled the ocean's choke points, trade routes, and ports. Naval dominance allowed Britain to move goods, troops, and information faster than any rival. It also allowed Britain to blockade enemies, disrupt economies, and protect its own commerce. Commerce was the second pillar. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a charter to a private company, the East India Company. This decision would reshape global history. The company was not merely a business, it had its own army, minted currency, negotiated treaties, and governed territory. By the mid-18th century, it effectively ruled large parts of the Indian subcontinent. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 marked a decisive moment. Through a combination of military force, local alliances, and financial manipulation, the company gained control over Bengal, one of the richest regions in the world. Wealth flowed outward. Taxes, raw materials, and profits were extracted and reinvested into Britain's economy. This was not accidental. Britain developed a sophisticated financial system to support empire, the Bank of England, founded in 1694. A national debt market, insurance firms like Lloyd's of London. War and trade became financially sustainable. The third pillar was law and administration. Britain exported its legal framework, contracts, courts, civil services across its territories. Local elites were often incorporated into colonial governance, creating a system that ruled indirectly, but effectively. This administrative model allowed Britain to govern vast populations with relatively few British officials. At its height, around 1920, the British Empire controlled territory on every inhabited continent. Roughly 1/4 of the world's land surface and nearly 1/4 of its population lived under British rule. It was the largest empire in human history. But this system carried deep contradictions. Empire was profitable for Britain, but costly for those it governed. Colonial economies were reshaped to serve imperial needs. Traditional industries declined as colonies were forced to export raw materials and import finished British goods. In India, textile production collapsed under competition from British factories. In Ireland, land ownership structures contributed to the Great Famine of the 1840s. In Africa and the Caribbean, forced labor and plantation systems left enduring scars. Resistance was constant. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 exposed the fragility of company rule and led to direct British Crown governance. In Kenya, the Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s revealed the violence underpinning colonial control. In Ireland, repeated rebellions culminated in independence in 1922. From the British perspective, Empire was often framed as order, progress, and civilization. From the colonized perspective, it was dispossession, hierarchy, and control. Both views existed simultaneously, and the tension between them grew over time. Importantly, resistance was not merely military, it was intellectual and political. Educated colonial elites began to use British legal and political ideas, rights, representation, self-rule against the empire itself. The system Britain built was beginning to turn inward. The decline of the British Empire was not sudden, it was structural. 2 world wars accelerated what had already begun. World War I drained Britain financially and psychologically. World War II finished the process. Britain emerged victorious, but exhausted, indebted, and dependent on American support. The global balance of power had shifted. The United States and the Soviet Union dominated the post-war world. Colonial rule became economically unsustainable and politically indefensible. At home, Britain faced reconstruction. Abroad, independence movements gained momentum. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947. African colonies followed through the 1950s and 60s. The Suez Crisis of 1956 marked a symbolic, and Britain could no longer act unilaterally on the global stage. The empire was not overthrown in a single moment. It was dismantled, negotiated, and relinquished, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. By the late 20th century, Britain remained influential, but no longer imperial. The British Empire is gone, but its imprint remains. Borders drawn during colonial rule still shape modern conflicts. English remains a global language. Parliamentary systems, legal codes, and trade networks bear imperial origins. The empire's legacy is neither purely positive nor purely negative. It is complex, contested, and unresolved. Britain ruled 25% of the world, not because history favored it, but because it built systems that aligned power, finance, and control at a global scale. Those systems eventually exceeded their own limits. Empires fall not when they are defeated, but when they can no longer justify their own existence. In that sense, the British Empire did not simply lose power. It reached the end of its historical logic. And the world we live in today is still shaped by that ending. If history is a mirror, then the rise and fall of empire is not a story of the past, but a warning written into the present.